the Public Building Commission took the initiative and submitted a request to Congresswoman Halverson to try to get on the list for either, at the time we thought it was stimulus money, later determined probably we were on the list for federal appropriation, the normal federal appropriation process, to see if some funding could be sought for the courthouse expansion. So that revives the discussion in terms of, well, okay, what exactly do we want here? And we based our request for funding based on the space needs study and the concept plan that was presented in 2006. I thought it would be appropriate to revisit that study and make sure this committee understands what is in there and that we're all on board with the concept that, number one, we need to do what we're asking to do. Number two, we need the square footage that we're talking about. And number three, some basic concepts about where we do this and how we do it. So again, we asked Dennis Kimme to join us today and maybe talk in generalities about that report. We may need to have him back again to get into some more detail. So,
Mr. Kimme, if you come forward. Morning and welcome.
Morning, thanks. That's the hot seat.
That's the hot seat.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. As a presenter, I might add it would be great if we did have something, because I know I presented before in this room, and some of you may have seen us do it, and it was always kind of an awkward place to set up a projector and have a screen. And so I don't know if this happens in next month and we come back next month. We could maybe do a PowerPoint, because we do have one that we did, and some of you may have seen it. When we concluded the study in 2006, we actually did several versions of the PowerPoint. But we do have things that we could probably show you again that'll be better than me just talking to you or talking at you about it. But if I can briefly overview, and then I'll be glad to answer any kind of questions you have. The study, as mentioned, and I think some of you have seen it, has this cover on it, if you're looking for it in your batch of materials, was concluded in 2006. And the original mission was both to look at your court operations, your criminal justice operations in the courthouse, but also the county administration that functions in this building as well. Now, what I actually kind of did my homework on this morning was the courthouse as opposed to the county government building. So that's really what I intended to talk about this morning. The process that we started really began with an evaluation of the facilities that you had, not making any assumptions initially about where anything should go and why it should go there. It just was an evaluation of what you had, and at the end of the day, what the square footage requirements might be as we go down the road, because historically, we are a growing community here. I think we noted that when this courthouse was built, or the courthouse over there was built, for example, this was a community of about 40,000 people. And at the time we were wrapping up the study, the 2004 population estimate was about 102,000. So there's quite a bit of growth over the period of time when that courthouse first opened, with only 2 courtrooms, you know, to the kind of population and more to the point, the caseload growth that the courts had to deal with, which is really at the end of the day the driver of what you need, not only in the way of numbers of courtrooms, but space for state's attorney, probation, public defender, clerk, and everything else. That's really driven by caseload, the seriousness of the caseload, and how time is related to cases. For example, felony cases, as you might imagine, take a lot longer to move through the courts and take a much greater work effort than, say, a misdemeanor case or a traffic case. So in the body of the work, we start out with the evaluation of the buildings and also evaluation of the caseload. What was the caseload history and how was that going forward? So we did projections of both the county population, worked with local folks here and regional folks on what those estimates would likely be and what the caseload projections were. And so what we're really trying to do is establish a foundation or a base against which we can evaluate the need for future space. And just some overview square footages on what we found within the courthouse itself, and also, you know, functions like probation, other criminal justice functions. At the time we did the study, they had an existing need of, or existing utilization of about 38,000 square feet. That's what they had available to themselves. After we got done doing evaluation of the spaces, and if you've been through there, you couldn't help notice a lot of what we did, which is how crowded it is and how much people are on top of each other. And, you know, we talked about the difficulty of moving around here. Well, that's also the case in a lot of the functions over there. By the time we got done projecting the number of courtrooms we needed, plus all the support spaces and the other criminal justice functions, again, state's attorney, public defender, what we concluded was you needed roughly today, or in 2006, twice the square footage that you were actually operating in. So that was a pretty dramatic conclusion and finding in and of its own right. As we marched forward in time and did projections of that caseload and population, then the subsequent growth from that departure point of about 78,000 square feet, our long-term projection for the courts, state's attorney and all those related functions, was about 103,000 square feet. And 103,000 square feet in percentage terms is roughly 166% more than you had. So what we were identifying was really a fairly dramatic long-term need of space. Now, incidentally, we found not quite as much growth, but significant growth in the county administration building as well. And I remember one of the topics we had talked about was this very room. A lot of the subjects you were just now reviewing, you know, how difficult it is to meet with people. And incidentally, I don't know if you're into doing some of these wide screens and you're marking the agenda, it might be interesting to have one out in that hallway and corridor where people wait and, you know, to kind of diffuse your public problem, you know, have some people be able to wait out there until they see their agenda item is up, kind of give them public space now. So if I'm butting in on that one, just let me know. But I was just listening to what you were saying and thinking about the issues we've seen in the past when we've been up here. Okay. But so that was sort of our departure point, was then trying to find a way to address the needs of 102,000 square feet for all of the justice functions in Kankakee County. Now, it's really not an aside, but another significant part, and you actually mentioned in some of your other discussions today, was parking. And what we had identified when we did this study, in terms of the parking space you had available in 2006, plus what we counted as kind of street-level parking that the public might use when they were accessing the building as opposed to any defined public lots, we counted about 460 spaces around this area. As we projected those needs forward in the year 2030, based on the staff growth and the case filing growth and the anticipated visitor growth, we were seeing that the courthouse would probably, with its functions, have a demand of around 700 parking spots. And that's important because, you know, especially if we're looking at downtown sites, and even if we're looking at non-downtown sites, there is a significant amount of land area or space that you have to find for parking, not just the building itself. You know, it doesn't do much good to expand the building and then have nowhere for people to park, to access and utilize that building. So we really have two levels of issue when we deal with the courthouse and the justice-related functions. After we had identified the space needs, then we went about the business working with the committees and local folks. What are the basic options? How do you solve that need, and where do you solve that need? One option that was discussed at the time was going to what you might refer to as a green space option. We talked about, for example, having a brand new justice facility, a brand new courthouse, if you will, out by the jail. You know, because there's some logic to that, to kind of consolidate all your criminal justice functions, and we're certainly in the business of transporting offenders to the courthouse. And when we looked at, of course, evaluating the courthouse, among the sorts of problems other than lack of space was the security problem of how do you move inmates securely to the building, move them securely through the courthouse and into the courtrooms themselves. And in modern courthouse design, as a security matter, generally what we try to achieve when we design a new one, and this is actually part of the Supreme Court standards in Illinois, is that the movement of the inmate to the courtroom should not cross traffic with the public, with judges, with jurors, with anybody else. There ought to be secure, direct routes. One of the drawbacks, and this will kind of lead up to one of the options we looked at downtown, of a classic courthouse like yours, and it is a classic design, it's one of the most beautiful facilities we've seen. There is no way in those courthouses to get an inmate directly to the courtroom without going through public elevators, out through public corridors, past victims, past witnesses, opposing attorneys, and so forth. So it's a difficult problem to solve, and it's obviously solved with a new facility. So when we did look downtown, the main option that we looked at in terms of expanding the courthouse was to focus all of the courtrooms eventually in this new addition, because we could not only meet compliance with Illinois Supreme Court standards on the courtrooms And we have, incidentally, in terms of the space standards, 5 of the 9 courtrooms were not complete.